Gemar Chasim Matov, everyone. Someone told me they came because they heard I was giving a heter to eat on Yom Kippur. It's not what today's shir is about. The title of the shir is "What Should I Eat When I'm Not Fasting?" So, in addition to getting a lot of shilas about, a person will call and say, "I have a certain medical condition, I'm pregnant, diabetes, and so forth. Should I fast? Should I not fast?" A lot of times, once the heter is given to eat, then the question becomes, okay, so what should I eat? Now, we know that there's a halacha of eating pachos mikashir, which is the preferred method of eating, which is that we tell a person optimally if you can imbibe the necessary nutrients that you need without eating more than a kikosevis, which is the amount, the date measurement that the Torah says that you're not allowed to have on Yom Kippur. Or if it's liquid, if it's less than malolugmav, which is the measurement of a cheekful, is approximately a kazayas as well, or rovervius. So we tell a person if you can avoid eating that full amount and break it up into smaller amounts, that you should do as well. Then the question becomes, okay, but what should I eat? In other words, can I have steak? Or do I have to eat like really inexpensive food? Or do I have to eat food that tastes bad? In other words, once a person has a heter to break their fast, is there a qualitative imperative to downgrade as much as possible the geschmack that you're getting? I mean, should I dafka avoid eating the foods that I really like? Or once I've been given the heter to eat, should I go ahead and eat? So I want to go through a few makaros with you, and then I want to take a look at Rav Meir Simcha and the Or Sameach, because he's a very interesting piece on this whole thing. But let's go through the sources first, just to set this whole thing up. We're going to see two Gemaras today, and then we're going to look through the Tur and the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch. The first Gemara that we're going to see today is a Gemara in Yoma, which the Mishnah starts off by saying, Ubra shehiricha, that if a pregnant woman smells a certain fragrance, a certain aroma of food, and it causes her to triggers a certain physical reaction within her, to the point where she may even be experiencing contractions as a result of the aroma. So ma'achilin osa ad shetashiv nafsha. We feed her until she calms down. Chole ma'achilin osa al pi b'kiyan. If a person is physically ill and needs food in order to maintain his health, so we feed him based on what the doctors say that this person needs. V'im ein sham b'kiyan, and if there are no doctors present, ma'achilin osa al pi atzma ad sheyomar dai. Then we feed him based upon what he says he needs. Look, he says, I'm chalashing, I have diabetes, I have some other condition that requires me to eat food, and therefore we can feed him until he says, okay, I don't need any more. Now, the language of the Mishnah seems to imply that you're supposed to try to minimize the amount of food that you're supposed to feed both to the pregnant woman and to the medically ill person. Let's take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara clarifies this further with the Brisa. Tanu Rabbanan. Ubra shehiricha basar kodesh o basar chazir. So here the Gemara is quoting a Brisa which is not talking about on Yom Kippur, but rather it's talking about a pregnant woman who smells the aroma of sacrificial meat or pig meat, and she's chalashing now for it. So tochvin la kush berotev umenichin la alpiha. We take a toothpick or some kind of small little piece of wood, like a toothpick. We dip it in the gravy of that forbidden substance, and we place it on her lips. Okay? Im nisyash v'daita mutav. If that's enough to calm her down, then that's all. That we shouldn't give her any more. V'im lav ma'achilan osarotev atzma. But if not, then you should give her some of the gravy from the pig roast or whatever that is. Okay? V'im nisyash v'daita mutav. If that's enough to calm her down, then great. V'im lav ma'achilan osa shuman atzmo. But if that's not enough, then give her some of the mamish, the fat of the meat. Give her some of the fat itself. And the reason is that we are going to allow her to eat a forbidden substance is she'en l'chadavar she'omid b'fnei pikuach nefesh chutz me'avodah zara b'gili arayos u'shvichus damim. And of course the very famous statement is because nothing stands in the face of saving or preserving a life, except for the 3 cardinal sins. And these are not cardinal sins. To eat kudshim, or to eat chazer, or to eat on Yom Kippur is not a cardinal sin. The only 3 cardinal sins are avodah zarah, idolatry, gili arayis, sexual illicitness, and shvichas damim, and murder. So as long as you don't have to violate one of those 3 cardinal sins in order to preserve your life, you're supposed to do whatever it takes. Okay, let's take a look at another story. We're going to get more clarity on this. This brisa, actually, this quote cited by the Gemara, is actually very, very important. It really is referring specifically to not Yom Kippur, and that's going to be significant when we have our discussion. Take a look at now another Gemara. This Gemara is in Ksubas Daf Samach Aleph. And I just, for convenience, I put the Rashi in parentheses in the text itself, so that it would flow better. Ameimor Marzutra v'Ravashi havokeyasvi apischa devei Asgor Malka. That Ameimor Marzutra and Ravashi were sitting by the doorway of this Persian king whose name was Asgor Malka. Chalif ve'ozal aturniga de Malka. The royal feeder, or the royal butler who was carrying the king's portion, actually walked. They must have come for some dispatch from the Jewish community. All of a sudden, the butler's coming with the king's tray of food and is walking past them. Chazi Ravashi Marzutra de Chaver Ape. Ravashi noticed that Marzutra's face was ashen. I guess he was chalashing. Maybe he had been fasting, and then he smells this delicious chazer treif food that they're about to feed the Persian king, and he starts the chalash. So shakal be'etzba'aseh anachle bepume. So Ravashi very indelicately sticks his finger in the dish that was being brought to the king, and sticks his finger in Marzutra's mouth. So this, of course, is going to create a royal scandal. Amarle Tornagal Ravashi. So the royal butler turns to Ravashi and says, "Afsadis l'seudasa de Malka." He says, "You've just destroyed the king's dish. He's not going to," like Rashi says, he's not going to. We can't feed the king a dish that a commoner has placed his finger in, right? So Amrulay, so the officers that were present, that were witness to this whole scandal, said, "Amai tiavid hachi." They said to Rabbi, "Why did you do that? You ruined the king's dinner." Amr lahu man da'avid hachi pasal amaychol de malka. So Ravashi turned back to them and said, like Rashi says, anyone who cooks food like this is not, the king is not worthy of feeding the king. How could you make a dish like this and expect to feed it to the king? So they say to him, "What are you talking about?" Amar le, "Amai, what are you talking about? What's wrong with this food?" Amar lahu davar acher chazoi be. So he says, "Well, I know that in this dish that you've prepared for the king, there's a pig with leprosy that you've cooked together with this dish, and that's why I stuck my finger in." So badku v'lo ashkachu. They checked the whole pot or the whole tray, and they didn't find any leprous pig meat. Shakal etzba'aseh anachale. Then Ravashi pointed to one of the pieces. Amar lahu hachami badki. So did you check this piece? And badku ashkachu. And they found it turned out that piece of meat had tsaras. It must have had some symptoms of having leprous flesh. Okay? Rashi says nes nasalo. A miracle was performed for Ravashi, because there was really nothing wrong with the food, but a miracle happened, and that he was able to save grace. So Amr le Rabbanan, my time is samchas anisa. So the Chachamim say, why did you have to rely on a nes to feed Marzutra? Amr lahu chazoi ruach saras de kapar chayluya de Marzutra. He said, because I noticed that there was Marzutra was about to contract leprosy out of his hunger, and if I didn't put something in his mouth at that minute, he could have actually died, or actually contracted a disease that would have resulted in his death. And so that's why I was justified in taking a risk, and because I know that I'm a great tzaddik, the great Ravashi, I was going to rely on a miracle in case we got into any trouble. So this is where the poskim derive that not only does this halacha apply to a woman who's pregnant and who's chalashing for food, but it applies to any chola, to any person who you detect that their life may be in any way endangered by not eating. You're allowed to feed them a forbidden substance. And this would certainly apply to a fast day, but it applies actually not on a fast day, if there's no other food available, and the only thing that you see is a double bacon cheeseburger, you got to go for it. You got to go when you got to go. So that's basically what the Gemara is saying. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Torah and see how the Torah translates this halacha. So the Torah in Siman Tafrei Shub Zayin says, "Ubra she'iricha machal v'imlo yitnu la mimena tistakein hi o havlad." Now this is very important as well. This is what we explain to a pregnant woman. The pregnant woman says, "Well, listen, I can tolerate the fast." But we say to her, "But can is your fetus under duress?" Well, how does a woman know? Pregnant woman doesn't always know when her fetus is under duress, but there are times, especially when the baby's kicking or they start having contractions, that could be a sign of danger, and therefore a woman should not take those symptoms seriously. So the first thing we do, and this is actually a citation from the same Gemara in Yoma, which from the next page, Lo chashin ba'azna shahayom Yom Kippurim. So first we whisper in her ear, "Madam, be aware that today is Yom Kippur." And that may actually jar her back to reality and could have a physiological effect. Dr. Cohen, I know, works a lot with this, but many times a person's psychology can affect their physical status as well. So if you mention to remind her, today's Yom Kippur, that actually could bring her body to a place of calmness and will calm her down. So therefore the Gemara says, Im tisyashev data muta. Now if she calms down, very well and good. Now, this bracket over here is extremely important because there are editions of the Torah that do not have this next line. In the Beis Yosef's edition of the Torah, he did not have this line. There are other manuscripts that do include it, and the more recent manuscripts of the Torah, the more recent publications of the Torah, do include this line in the Torah. And you're going to see in just a moment when we read the Beis Yosef together, you're going to see that the Beis Yosef did not have this line in the Torah. We'll read it anyway. V'im lav, if she doesn't calm down after we tell her that it's Yom Kippur, toch ben kush barota, we take a toothpick, stick it in the gravy, umachnisin l'soch piha, and we stick some of the gravy in her mouth. In Yisyashiv daita mutav, if she calms down, well and good. And then here's where the Beis Yosef's text continues. V'im lav nostin lamin harotev. If she doesn't calm down after you whispered in her ear that today's Yom Kippur, give her some of the gravy. V'im lo nisyashiv daita bazeh nostin lamin ha'isser atzmo. And if she doesn't come down from that, then you should give her some of the forbidden substance itself. And then the Torah goes on to discuss that, quoting the Ramban, that this only applies to a pregnant woman, but if you have a doctor who tells you exactly what the patient needs and how much of the substance the patient needs, you have to follow the doctor's regimen. If the doctor says this man has a certain sugar level or a certain type of diabetes which requires him to eat such and such a certain amount of glucose per day, then you don't play games. You have to give the patient exactly the amount that the doctor says that the patient needs. And also, similarly, if you see a person smell something and his face becomes ashen as a result, it looks like he grows very pale and he's about to faint. So then don't hesitate. Just give him something to eat or to drink, and that's fine. Let's skip. I don't know why I put the Beis Yosef after the Shulchan Aruch, but let's go to source number 6 in the Beis Yosef. Now, you'll see from the Beis Yosef that he had, as I mentioned, he did not have that line in the Torah, that if after whispering her she doesn't recover, then you take a toothpick and you dip it in the gravy and you give it to her. He doesn't have that line. So the Beis Yosef notices this, and he says in Siman Tafrei Shub Zayin, he says, "V'hincha ro'eh sheyesh b'divrei Rabbeinu chisaron." He says, you'll notice that in the Torah, there's a chunk missing from that brisa that was quoted by the Gemara. Shahavale lichtov tochnim akush berote. He should have put in the line that first, after whispering to her, you should take a toothpick and stick it in the gravy, but he doesn't have that line. Okay? Now, but this is really just a preface to quoting the Rambam, because the Rambam is even more problematic, because in the Rambam's language, he brings this very same halacha, but he's completely absent all of the details that were cited in the Brisa. He says, "Uvedivrei haRambam yesh yoser chisaron." There's even a greater deficiency in his language. Shekosav ubra shehiricha because he just writes as follows, that if a pregnant woman smells an aroma, lo chishin lo be'oznaim sheyom kippurim hu, we whisper into her ear that today is Yom Kippur. Im niskara radaita b'zikaron ze mutav, if she calms down through her this recollection, well and good. V'im lav machilan osa shetisya daita atkan, but if not, just feed her. Just give her whatever she needs. Now notice in the language of the Rambam that there is no graduated or a gradual process of getting her to eat the forbidden substance. It's not first stick a toothpick in the gravy, put it on her lips, and if that doesn't work, give her some of the gravy, and if that doesn't work, give her some of the actual meat itself. Notice that the Rambam jumps from, if whispering into her ear that today's Yom Kippur doesn't help, just give her to eat. And that's quite significant for the Beis Yosef. He says it's not. He says for whether or not you have the right gears in the tour or not, but look at the Rambam. The Rambam is very problematic. He doesn't have those middle steps, and the question is why not? He says v'nira shuhu sover shelo amru kain ela kishahama'achal asur. So take a look at the distinction that the Beis Yosef is drawing. He says the Rambam is of the opinion that brisa that was quoted by the Gemara, where there's a gradual bringing her to the point of actual eating the actual forbidden substance, is only when the substance itself is a forbidden substance. Kegon shehu basar kodesh hu basar chazir, such as a sacrificial meat or its pig meat. Uchidikatani, I should say pork, right? That's what's pig meat, pork. Uchidikatani bebraisa. Aval im hamachal atzmo mutar ve'eno asur ela mishum yom kippurim. But he says, but if the food substance itself is a permitted substance, and it's only forbidden because today is Yom Kippur and we all have to fast, he says, Ein sarich ledakdek bazeh. Then you don't have to be meticulous about that at all. Dekach li ochel meharotev kemo min habasar atzmo. He says, because on Yom Kippur, what difference does it make if you're eating the gravy or if you're eating the meat? And this is actually the point that we were trying to bring out today, right? In other words, once you're eating on Yom Kippur, it doesn't matter what you eat. So the Beis Yosef's argument is that this is why the Rambam doesn't go to this gradual to a progression of getting gravy is just as forbidden on Yom Kippur as the meat itself, right? Okay, Gerard, I'm glad you're here. We're doing an Or Sameach tonight, your favorite Rosh Hashiva. All right. So anyway. V'hainu demasnisin sasin lastume katani ubra shehiricha machilan osad shetashav nafsha. V'hadina shanoi bebraisa kosta beperak yalad minchas malchal osasur. And that's why there's a brisa which that's why the Rambam sort of seals off the brisa, basically meaning that he says it in very, very terse language, because on Yom Kippur it's different from when a woman is smelling pork. When she's smelling pork, you want to avoid her eating the pork itself. But on Yom Kippur, drinking pork juice or eating pork, there's no difference. Now, one could make a differentiation. One could say that perhaps it's not as bad even on Yom Kippur to drink pork juice as it is to eat pork. One could also perhaps make an even opposite argument, that it's better to eat pork than it is to drink something kosher, because maybe you could say that the isser of chazer is something that was set into this food substance before the isser of Yom Kippur set in. We have this principle of ein isser chalal isser. We don't want to get too fancy, but there is such a svara that I noticed was brought down by some of the other achronim. There's a note of Yehuda who talks about this, but we're not going to get into that tonight. But at the simplest level, it would seem that there's no reason to avoid pork over pork gravy. They're both equally usher on Yom Kippur. Yeah.
The original Mishnah in Gemara didn't make reference to the Michael itself; it just referred to the rotate. So where did the tour add the Michael itself? If in fact the Mishnah and the Gemara didn't.
Well, the Brisa does. The Brisa says, if you look in source number 1, the Brisa says, Uber shehiricha basar kodesh o basar chazir. You see that? The second paragraph in source number 1, which the Gemara quotes the Brisa. Yeah? You see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
The amount of juice on a toothpick It's well below the amount that fits in your cheek, so it's not even eating it.
Correct. Now, as we'll see in just a moment, there's another step in this gradual bringing her to the actual Isser, which is Pachos Mikashir. And that's something that is codified in Shulchan Aruch as well. Strangely enough, it's broken up into separate simanim, but the poskim combine the two halachas together, as we'll see in just a moment. Now he says, so let's just finish off the Beis Yosef. So he says, V'Rabbeinu, so the Tur, who skipped that part, remember the Beis Yosef's girsa of the Tur is that he doesn't have that line of using the toothpick, right? So he says, V'Rabbeinu shekasav nosin lamin harotev. So then, if that's the case, then the Tur doesn't really make any sense, because on the one hand, the Tur holds that there is a middle step between whispering into her ear and giving her a piece of pork, which is to give her the gravy. But if the Tur holds like the Rambam, then you shouldn't have that middle step either. So he says, Mayri shehamachal asur mitzad atzmo. He says that perhaps we're talking about a case the Tur is talking about a case where the food on Yom Kippur is not kosher, and that's the only food that's available. Maybe there's pork on Yom Kippur, and that's why the Tur says that if you have a choice of eating pork or eating kosher food on Yom Kippur, it's better to eat the kosher food. And therefore, since the juice from the pork is only the flavor of the pork but not the pork itself, it's better to eat the juice or the gravy from the pork and not the pork itself, even on Yom Kippur. But says the Beis Yosef, but I will grant you that even according to the Tur, if the food is kosher, there's no reason to give her gravy before you give her the actual steak. That's one way that he's understanding the Tur. The Tur only requires the middle step because the food is not kosher, which is a bit of a doichak when you think of it, because why would the Tur be talking about this contrived case of a woman who only has pork available on Yom Kippur? Okay? But anyway, V'od yesh lomar, here's my second answer, which I think is a little bit more in line with the meaning of the text. It says, B'machal mutar marinami. He says maybe the Tur is also talking about kosher meat. Ela dekari le'isser l'fisha Yom Kippurim aser ba'achila. But he says, but the reason why it's called forbidden food is because every food is forbidden on Yom Kippur, so that's why it's called non-kosher. And there too, says the Beis Yosef, even on Yom Kippur, you should give her the smallest amount of food that is possible. Dahainu rotev ulai tisyashev data bekach. Better to give her gravy than to give her the actual steak, because maybe she'll be calmed by the gravy before the steak. And if that's the case, then perhaps, he says, even the Rambam agrees that there's no difference between eating a forbidden substance on a regular day versus eating a kosher substance on Yom Kippur. Why then does the Rambam skip all of the middle steps? And you have to just teach in the Rambam, that even though the Rambam is very terse in his language, he really does mean to include all of the intermediary steps of gradation, of bringing her eventually to eating the actual steak. So the Beis Yosef really equivocates because he's stuck. And, sometimes it's difficult. The Beis Yosef really is trying to get his head around the Tur. He's given a very cogent explanation of the Rambam. He says why the Rambam skips the middle part of the Brisa, his initial reaction is because the Rambam holds that there's a difference between eating a kosher food on Yom Kippur versus eating non-kosher food on a regular day. Eating non-kosher food is better to go gradually to get to the actual Isser, but on Yom Kippur it makes no difference whether you eat the gravy or whether you eat the meat. Second answer, says the Beis Yosef, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe according to the Tur and the Rambam, there's no difference, and in both the case of Yom Kippur and in the case of non-kosher food, you have to go gradually and do whatever you can to avoid eating the actual substance itself. Eating gravy is not as bad as eating the actual food substance itself. The Beis Yosef really doesn't explain why on Yom Kippur that should be, but he says essentially that eating gravy is not as bad as eating the non-kosher food, the steak itself. But why that should be is not really clear from the language of the Beis Yosef. It's a little bit difficult. He sort of leaves us a bit hanging. He just says that he says hayoser ma'at she'efshar. He says there's less substance to gravy. So perhaps from a substantive point of view, there's maybe less content in the gravy than there is in an actual steak. So better to give her that. Now, what exactly that means is a bit ambiguous. Does it mean that it's not as heavy? It's not as caloric? It's not as filling? We don't really know. We don't really know from the language of the Beis Yosef what he really means. And when we take a look at the Shulchan Aruch, we see also an ambiguity in the language of the Mechaber. I mean, the Mechaber is the Beis Yosef himself, right? And so the Mechaber himself in source number 4 also it really seems to be going more like the Rambam, strangely enough. And he says, Ubra Shehiricha, if a pregnant woman smells an aroma, and then the Ramah says, and we see that Upaneha Mishtanim Afal Pishalo Amr Tzrichani, and we see that her face goes ashen even though she doesn't say I need to eat. Lo Chishin La Ba'azna Shema Kippurim Hu, we whisper into her ear that it's Yom Kippur. Im Niskara Daita V'Zikaron Zemutav. If she remembers, great. V'im Lav, if she calms down, I should say, from remembering this, great. V'im Lav Machilan Osah Shetisyashiv Daita. Now, what language is he using? He's using the language of the Rambam, right? And even though the Beis Yosef himself was equivocating and suggesting that perhaps you have to go by step and give her the gravy and stick the toothpick in and then give her the gravy and then get to the meat only as a last resort, you see that in the final analysis he said, it's safe, my safest bet, because he was equivocating, the safest bet is to use the language of the Rambam. But what's curious is that the Magen Avraham and many other Achronim, including the Mishnah Berurah, do cite the Beis Yosef, the second answer of the Beis Yosef, and this is in source number 7, and they point out that you have to feed her gradually. It's not enough just to give her a steak right away. And the Magen Avraham in source number 7 says, Machilan osapir shetochin kush berote, v'nosin l'soch pia, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So the Magen Avraham says this is what the Rambam means. In other words, even though the Mechaber uses the same ambiguous language of the Rambam, but just like the Beis Yosef was able to read into the Rambam, which is a bit of a contrivance, but he was able to teach it into the Rambam's lashon itself, that you have to go gradually until you get to the actual steak. That's the same teich that you have to put into the language of the Mechaber himself. Because after all, the Beis Yosef is the Mechaber, right? And everyone with me so far? Okay, so far so good. Just as for comprehensiveness, you should know that in the following siman in Shulchan Aruch, and siman Taf Reish Yud Ches, the Mechaber says, qualifies the whole halacha, and adds another step into this series of gradations. The Mechaber writes, "Kishemachilan es ha'overos o es ha'chole," when you feed a pregnant or sick person, ma'achilan osa ma'at ma'at kidei shelo yitzaref l'shi'ur. You have to feed them in small increments so that you don't get a full shear of a kikoseves. And that's why he says, and the shear is hilchach machilan oso kibei shlishay beitza beinonis, about 2/3 of an egg, which is what a kikoseves is like, somewhere in between a kizayas and a kibetza. Okay? And v'yishu kadei achilas arba'a beitzim, and then you have to wait the amount of time that it takes to eat 4 beim of food. It was about 9 to 10 minutes. And v'hashasiya, and then as far as if drinking, yivtiku b'chola atzmo kamahu kadei shisalkenu l'sad echad v'yeira kimel lugma. It's subjective to the size of the cheek of the person who's ill. Whatever would fill a cheek full, which is usually what we call a rov revius, for the average person. So then that's the amount. Not more than that. They can't drink up to that amount. And then you wait, and then they can drink again after the requisite waiting period. Okay. All right, so for this next piece, so far we have a bit of an ambiguity in the Rambam. The Beis Yosef wants to teach in the Rambam, at least some want to teach in the Rambam, that what the Rambam means by skipping over all of the intermediate steps is that he really means to include them. It's a bit of a dochak. So let's take a look. For this, you're going to think this is out of left field, but to understand this Or Sameach, Reb Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, who was the author of the Meshech Chochmah, also wrote a very famous commentary on the Rambam called the Or Sameach, great Rosh Yeshiva of the 19th century. In order to understand it, we have to read the following Mishnah and Gemara from Masechah Shavuos. You're going to think this is a bizarre Gemara, but you'll see how it makes sense in just a second. Ve'ezohi mitzvah saseh shebenida shechayavin aleha. What is the positive commandment that a person has to fulfill in the context of the laws of Nida? So the Mishnah says, Hayom mishamishim hatahora v'amar lo nitmesi upiresh miyad chayav. That if a man is in the midst of marital intimacy with his wife, and she tells him while they're in the midst of it, I've just become a Nida. I've just had a discharge, a bloody discharge. Then if he pulls out with immediacy, then he's committed an additional Aveira. Why? Because pulling out quickly while he's still in his state of being erect causes pleasure. So the actual act of withdrawing provides the stimulation, and therefore he's added to his stimulation, and that's what makes him liable. Okay, so what is the Mishnah advocating? We'll see in just a second. Let's take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara now says, Omar Mar Pirish Miyad Chayev. So the Mishnah had said that if he pulls out with immediacy, he is liable. So Hechiyavit. So the Brisa asks, so what is he supposed to do? Omar Avuna Mishmei Derava, Noetz Eser Tzipornav Bekarka Ad Shiyamus Vitove. What he should do is that he should, once he hears that his wife is a Nida, grab a hold of himself, just prop himself up, and then wait until his passion dies down, until his erection is lost, and then he should withdraw. So Omar Rava Zosomeres. So Rava, now we have an interesting machlokas between Rava and Abaye. Rava says Zosomeres Hamishamesh Meis Ba'arayos Patur. We can adduce from here that if a person has relations with a woman without being sexually aroused by it, in other words, where his aver is not bekishoy, so then he's going to be pater. Why is that? De'isal gadai chayav, because if you're going to tell me that in that situation he's also liable, hacha my time a patur. Why then should we tell you that you're pater because you waited for the erection to lapse? Mishum da'anasu, because you have no other choice. I anasu ki pirish miyad nami nifter anasu. If that's the argument, then it shouldn't make any difference whether you're erect or flaccid. You're going to be, you have no choice, and therefore you should be pater. So therefore, the fact that the Mishnah requires the person to lose his stimulation means that in itself is not what makes a person liable. Okay, so he's only liable when he's sexually active. So Amarle Abaye la'olamei malacha hameshamesh meis ba'arayos chayav. So Abaye says no. Really, I'll argue that it makes no difference whether you're flaccid or erect. In both cases, if a man has sexual contact with a woman who is usher to him, he's still performing a forbidden act. V'hacha my time a pater. So then why did the rabbis exempt him in a case when he's flaccid and say he's liable when he's erect? The answer is mishum da'anasu, because when he's flaccid, there's nothing else for him to do. So then your question is, well, then if he's erect, why then shouldn't he be pater as well? He has no other choice. And this is the key line: because he had the option of either performing a forbidden act with less pleasure or with more pleasure, with less stimulation or more stimulation. So the fact that he has an option to do a forbidden act with a lower level of personal pleasure is what is required of him, versus when he's performing a forbidden act with a greater amount of stimulation or pleasure. That's why Chazal say that if you have the option and you choose the option that gives you more pleasure, more hana'ah, that's what makes you chayav. I noticed that all the people that were dozing off woke up when we started this Gemara. It's very interesting. I wonder why. Anyway, so we go on. Now let's take a look at the Or Sameach. Now, yes.
But in all the sources so far dealing with eating, we haven't given a reason for any of this. Like whether you do it gradually or gradually, there's no reason for it.
Well, the Beis Yosef, I think, has tried to give us some explanation. First, he tried to explain that for the Rambam, there really is no difference between gravy and meat on Yom Kippur. They're both equally forbidden. But then he says, no, perhaps qualitatively there is a difference between the two. Now, we've just presented you with a Gemara that you can see now where we're going with this analogy. Right? In other words, what's the analogy? It seems like you've been given a dispensation to do something which is forbidden. Right? So, right? So the question is, if I have a choice of doing a forbidden act with less pleasure or doing a forbidden act with more pleasure, what am I obligated to do? So it seems from this Gemara that I'm obligated to get less pleasure from the forbidden act, even though I have a heter now to do it because I'm stuck, or in the case of Yom Kippur, I need to eat because otherwise my life is in danger. So then maybe I have to eat the food which gives me the least amount of pleasure.
So the adage in Yiddish doesn't mean as anything more.
That's right. If you're once you're eating, you might as well let the chazer fat run down your lips, right?
Would the concepts of Hutra or Dechuya have any application to us?
Hutra or Dechuya? I don't know. Those are terms that are used for the Korban Pesach. So I don't know whether we can apply those terms here. I haven't thought about that. Let's take a look at what Meir Simcha says. Ubra shehiricha meichel asur. So first he quotes, he says, B'shem chacham echad. He says, Shamati, which is on source number 10, Shamati b'shem, and this is the Or Sameach and Hilchos Machalos Asur's Perek Yudal. Shamati b'shem chacham echad shechakar b'chole shamduhu le'echol kezayis. He says that there was a certain wise rabbi that was consulted by a physician or consulted by a sick person, and the doctor said that this sick person needs to eat a kezayis of a certain substance, but the substance that he has to consume is a forbidden substance. Let's say he needs to eat a kezayis of pork, because the pork has a certain ingredient that he needs in order to survive. And he had an option of either eating lean pork or really fatty geschmacka pork, okay? And he instead ate the really fatty, more expensive, the sirloin or whatever it was of the pork, okay? O b'yom haKippurim shahaya lo lechol lechem v'yachal basar shamein. Or a similar question is that he had a heter because the physician said he needs to eat on Yom Kippur. But he could, by physician's orders, either eat bread or he could eat meat. For the doctor, it makes no difference for this person's medical condition. And he decides to eat he decides to eat steak instead of having a piece of bread. So what's the halacha? So mi chayev al zeh. Is he chayev? Is he doing anything wrong? Upashit le mehad perik beis de shvuas. Amar Rabbi lo olam amar le mishamish meis barais chayev. V'hachapotam mishum da anas ahu ala prisha. And this Chacham cited the Gemara that we just learned together about the man that is stuck, but he can withdraw from the nida in a way that gives him less pleasure, or in a way that gives him more pleasure. He's obligated to do it in a way that gives him less pleasure. In Kain Chazinan Da'al Riboy Hahana'a Chayav. So you see that even when you have a heter to do something, but if you're engaging in a forbidden activity and doing it in a way that gives you more pleasure, so you're liable for that. So kain hacha chayav al riboy hahana. So too over here, it's going to be the same thing. I should have just had a piece of bread when I broke my fast on Yom Kippur, but instead I went ahead and I had a 5-course meal, or I had an expensive steak. So therefore, I'm liable. However, sha'al zelo havi onas akan devara. These are the words of the Chacham. To be honest with you, I don't know who this is. I probably could do some kind of CD search and try to find who this is. But he's quoting this Chacham Echad. Uladaiti barer de pater ve'ein kan shum chiyuv alav. But the Or Sameach says that, in my opinion, just the opposite. It's clear to me that this person is no more liable for eating steak on Yom Kippur than for eating bread on Yom Kippur. The ha'ikr d'shayni b'shayni. He says, because you're comparing apples and oranges. He says, what's the difference? Hechi de ha'isurim hema b'nei shi'ura kamo isurei achila. He says, because you have to think about what the basis of the measurement of the prohibition is. If the prohibition is measured in quantity, such as food, so then you cannot make qualitative evaluations to say that one is more usur and one is more mutter. He says the only way to increase the prohibition is with quantity, not with quality. The kaven shekan shekazayas havi onus lamechol biisura rak de ha'echos havi muat. He says over here, the guy is now, he's obligated to eat a kazayas of forbidden substance, whether it's a kazayas of pig on a regular day or a kazayas of whatever food on Yom Kippur, but he has the option of eating something that is qualitatively inferior. The achal ba'ofen shebechusuhu rav, and instead he eats something that is qualitatively superior. Ha'echus k'shetishud asa below nosei ha'echus ze'esam ha'kamosi. He says when we strip away the quality of the food substance, we are left with the exact same quantity with either the fatty food or the lean food. Eino chashiv kishiura, and therefore that's not to be taken into account. The qualitative difference between the two is a non sequitur for the Or Sameach, because that's not how the Torah measures the level of prohibition when it comes to consumption. The kaven shelashir ha'achila b'yom ha'kippurim shava kikoseves milechem yavesh lebasar shamei, and therefore he says, since the amount of eating on Yom Kippur, it makes no difference whether you eat a kikoseves, which is the size of a date, of dry bread or fatty meat. The ein ha'echus mekatenes hashiur, and the quality does not diminish the size, the quantity. Eich tuchal lachshav k'shayit tzarech lechol kazayis o kikoseves v'rak dehavimatzi lechol midi dehanaso me'ata v'yachol midi dehanaso meruba eich tachshavo l'shir kazayis l'chayavo. He says, how can you therefore say that an improved or augmented quality of food substance is going to increase the prohibition? You see very clearly, and he says, and furthermore, he says, I'll give you a raya. He said, I'll give you proof. Now, the basic argument that he's making is food consumption. When the Torah prohibits certain food consumption, it talks in terms of quantity. There was never a qualitative evaluation made on the prohibited substance. The Torah only places a benchmark on the quantity, not on the quality. And therefore, you can't tell me that I'm doing anything more forbidden or more permitted based on the quality of the food that I'm eating. Once I have the heter, I can eat whatever I want. So he says, Puk chazi beperik Yom Kippurim daf peyom beis. He says, in Yoma itself, there's a Gemara that even discusses this point. It says, Maskif lo Reb Zera, basar shamein bekikoseves belul begafonim bekikoseves. He asks the question. The rabbis have this tradition that the prohibited amount of food that you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur is the size of a date, right? That's what we've mentioned. So Reb Zera asks a very simple question. You mean it doesn't make a difference whether it's heart of palm or whether it's a piece of steak? Are you telling me that it makes no difference in each one, the size is exactly the same? After all, isn't a person going to get more satisfaction out of eating a date size, a kikoseves size of steak, than a kikoseves size of heart of palm? So Amar le Abaya Kimlu Ula Rabbanan. Hare de b'chol ha'yisurim da'achila ksif b'hu v'shirin kazayis havipsikole de lo shani be'mulu be'gafanim lo davar shana asa meruba. Abaya says, no, this is what the rabbis had a tradition for. Both of these things provide satisfaction to a person. It's true that steak provides more satisfaction, but nevertheless, size, the quantity, is what is the ultimate criterion. It's true that steak, a date size of date will provide you more satisfaction than a date size of heart of palm, but anything less than that amount will not provide you with the requisite satisfaction. Even less than a kikoseves of steak will not provide you with the prohibited level of satisfaction that you need in order to violate Yom Kippur. The chaser etzem hakmos lichashav el achila. Rak Yom Kippurim v'loksiv be'achila v'talya below su'uneh. He says something very interesting. Yom Kippur is unique. Why is it that on Yom Kippur the measurement of forbidden substance is different from the other forbidden substances in the Torah? How much do you have to eat of a chazer in order to be liable? What's the shear of eating chazer? A kazayas. What's the shear of eating other forbidden? Generally speaking, whenever we talk about the consumption of forbidden substances, it's a kazayas. So why is it that on Yom Kippur the shear is larger, has to be a kikosevis in order to be liable? So the answer is because the Torah doesn't say you shall not eat on Yom Kippur. The Torah says ta'anu es nafsho seichem ki chol hanefesh asher lo se'uneh be'etzem hayom hazeh v'nichrasa. You have to afflict yourselves. So the Torah doesn't say don't eat. The Torah says rather afflict thyself. So the Gemara said, the Or Sameach says, the Gemara had a havamina, Reb Zera had a havamina, that because the Torah is not speaking strictly in terms of what is called eating, it's very clear, there's a quantitative definition of eating. And that's a kazayas. Anytime I eat or nibble on something and I consume less than a kazayas, that is not, by definition of the Torah, called achila. But perhaps you could argue that eating, since the Torah doesn't forbid eating here, it forbids non-affliction, it forbids me from the lack of affliction, so perhaps one could argue that it's subjective to the type of food. Maybe certain foods are more non-afflictive and other foods are less non-afflictive. Yes? Some foods provide more satisfaction, other foods provide less satisfaction, and therefore, Reb Zera said, then we should break it down according to food group or according to food item and see which food, do a test, do a marketing test and say, how much of this do you have to eat before you feel satisfied, right? Well, of course, satisfied is a very subjective term also, but anyway. So anyway, he says, but the conclusion of the Gemara is that even though the Torah doesn't use the term achila, even when it comes to the obligation of ta'anu, that you shall afflict yourselves, there is an objective, quantitative criterion of a kikosevis. And it doesn't matter what the food substance is, and therefore, says Rav Meir Simcha, once there is this objective quantity, quality cannot be a criterion. Because the only criterion that is cited by the Gemara is quantity, quality is out the window. And therefore, for him, eating the gravy is no different from eating the pork itself. And he says, Harei lecha bebarur gamur. This is the next paragraph. Therefore, when it comes to the qualitative differences between different foods, we don't take that into account. So therefore, if a person has to eat based upon his physical illness, he has to eat a certain requisite amount that would normally be forbidden for him to eat, whether it's a kazayas on a regular day of pork, or whether it's a kikosevis of kosher food on Yom Kippur, but he's eating it with greater satisfaction because it's a delicious piece of food, lo mischayev midi, shein ze shir, then he's not liable at all any further, there's no requisite quantity. Ve'en davar zeh nichnas besug hashiuri klal, v'lohavi af kechatzi shir, it's not even like adding a little bit more to the prohibition, lo shayach bechazi listarufe, v'pir shmiyat chay, okay. So then he says, so then the question is, why then is it in our Gemara, when we're talking about the man who's having intimacy with the Nida, why then is there a qualitative differentiation made? He says, the Taman midi de'en hachiyav besuk shir klal, v'chein chayav al riboy hahana'a. Because there's no quantity discussed. There's no quantity of sexual activity which defines it as this much is considered to be sexual activity and this much is not sexual activity. It's all based upon the gratification that the individual receives. So therefore, because the sexual activity is based on personal gratification, Chazal require that you minimize the gratification as much as possible. You minimize the pleasure as much as possible. That's why there's a difference. That's the inherent difference between the Gemara in Shavuos, which talks about the Nida, and the case of eating, which is objectively quantitative and has nothing to do with qualitative whatsoever. Yes, Simon?
But just going back to the eating, you can make a diuk that says that Lagabe Yom Kippur, so it's about the shear, it's not about the type of food. So therefore, whatever the shear is, that's it. It doesn't matter whether it's roitiv or whether it's a piece of meat. The minute you add treif into the equation, then maybe it's not just shear. Then it becomes, what are you over for eating treif, which could be is a different shear. Maybe that's already qualitative.
Are you talking about eating treif on Yom Kippur?
Yeah. So because he doesn't need to make a distinction on Yom Kippur. It's not a matter of what you're eating; it's a matter of the shear.
Correct. I mean, look, the standard case is that you're not eating treif on Yom Kippur. We only saw that in the Beis Yosef, who tried to kinech in the Torah that we're talking about eating treif on Yom Kippur, which is why you go in gradations. But
so the Or Samech is not.
The Or Samech is not subscribing to that. He's saying the Rambam is talking about Hilchas Yom Kippur. We're talking about kosher food, and when we're eating kosher food on Yom Kippur. It's quantity. It's purely quantity. It's not quality at all. Okay? But he's also saying that it would apply similarly. He says it could. We'll see further on in the Or Sameach. He says that you're right. You could make the distinction when it comes to treifa food, and we're going to see that in just a second. Okay? Now, then Reb Meir Simcha. I've skipped a few lines in the Or Sameach. And then he goes on in the next paragraph and he says, he says, a person is liable, the Gemara says, famous case, a person eats a half a kazayas of food, and then he vomits it up and eats it again. So he's consumed a full kazayas, even though his ingestion in toto is only a half a kazayas, but he's eaten a full kazayas, right? So he says, Mishum dahanos grono mihaika. He says there, the consumption of a kazayas is totally on how much he swallowed, how much benefit of going down his throat of food stuff that he puts in his mouth. V'chai bal hanoas grono. So gamkein hu shir hakimosi b'hanoas grono. Therefore, that too, it's not a question of benefit to the palate. That is what makes him chayiv. There has to be, it is, but there has to be a quantitative, objective, quantitative amount that has to benefit his palate in order for him to be liable. And therefore, if he spits up the half kazayas that he swallowed and swallows it again, then that's considered to be halachically eating or allowing to pass by his palate another half of the kazayas. Okay. Okay. Aval, he says, but that's one thing. Avalo shamanu chiluk bein davar shamen ladavar kachush. Talzeh yipoter lazeh yischayev komada habi derech achilu lachem bara deloshna. Beim achal basar shamen ba'osar shir and chayev. Okay, period. So now let's go to the fifth line, where he's now going to cite the Gemara that we were questioning before. What is the Rambam going to do with the Brisa itself, which talks about feeding a person gravy before you give them the actual pork? According to the Rambam, it shouldn't make a difference. Once the criterion is purely on quantity of food, then why does the Gemara say that it's preferable to give the person gravy first and only then give them pork? V'afim tam ki ikar devar Torah v'chayiv al kazayis habalua min hatam ein ze kuguf ha'isur she'eno mefurash b'Torah. He says the reason is because it's always preferable to give a person gravy of a forbidden substance than the forbidden substance itself. Even though we say tam ki ikar, even though we say that the flavor of forbidden substance is like the forbidden substance itself, and even if you hold that that's a Torah principle, but it's still not as bad as eating the forbidden substance itself. And therefore, the reason why it's preferable is because letting you drink the gravy of a forbidden substance, you're much less likely to eventually succumb to do a full-blown isser of eating a forbidden substance. Ulam kol zeh shayach b'yisurim. This is what Simi's point was. But that only applies to when we're talking about pork, a forbidden substance, let's say on a day that's not a fast day, where the doctor says you need to eat pork in order to survive. Aval b'yom ha'kippurim Lo shayach lechalek bein rotev l'shuman atzmo. But on Yom Kippur, like we saw, the Beis Yosef had tried to make this distinction as well. There's no reason to distinguish between the gravy and the actual steak. Debehu gufayu ha'isr lechol b'Yom HaKippurim. He says because for both there's a prohibition of eating. V'lachein Rabbeinu b'hilchos, and therefore he explains why there seems to be a bit of a contradiction in the Rambam. He says Rabbeinu b'hilchos Yom HaKippurim mashmid shemachil and osa min hamarak. That's why in Hilchos Yom Kippur, the Rambam takes out the graduated steps. He just says, just give her to eat. Because in Yom Kippur it makes no difference. He says, but in other place, where the Rambam talks about a person who needs to eat a forbidden substance, he does give the graduated criteria. He says, first give the person the marak, and then only if afterwards they will not be abated by the marak, you can give them the forbidden substance itself. Then he quotes the Torah, and he quotes the Beis Yosef. V'ulai mishum de lo chilku bein shari yisrael yom HaKippurim v'shuman atzmo chayish tvei dilma asil misrach lahakel b'yisurei Torah. He says, however, I have to defend the Torah and the Beis Yosef. Why did the Torah and the Beis Yosef? The Rambam is perfectly logical. There really should be no difference on Yom Kippur between the gravy and the pork and the steak itself. So why does the Torah insist on making a differentiation? His suggestion is as follows. Because the differentiation is applicable when it comes to eating other forbidden substances, like eating pork in February, when the doctor says you have a heter to eat pork because you need the substance, the ingredients of pork in order to help you feel better. So there we say that it's actually better to eat the gravy before you actually engage in the eating of the forbidden substance. So therefore Chazal made a low plug. They said, look, if we allow you to go straight to eating the steak on Yom Kippur, you may go ahead and eat the pork directly in a situation in February where you have a heter to eat pork. So therefore, just like there's generally an imperative to go gradually, to start with the gravy and then work your way up to the forbidden substance with other prohibitions, we'll do the same thing on Yom Kippur as well. That's the suggested solution that the Or Sameach offers in defense of the Torah and the Beis Yosef, who say that there has to be a gradation of eating on Yom Kippur as well.
And we need the Rabbanan, we need the right.
That's right. But then now he turns the whole thing upside down. And with this we'll conclude. He says, Amnam nira li de b'yom ha'kippurim rotev chamur tfei min ha'machal atzmo. He says, but I want to argue that on Yom Kippur, there's an argument to be made that it's actually better to eat the steak than it is to eat the gravy. Why is that? Because he argues that steak is a solid and gravy is a liquid. And you're allowed to eat more of a solid, which is the size of a kikoseves, like 2/3 of a kibetza, and when it comes to gravy, it's only a cheekful that is permitted. So if you have the option of eating gravy versus meat, you're better off opting for the meat, because there's a better chance that you won't end up violating the halacha, because you'll be able to subsist with less. So therefore he says, "V'lachein divrei Rabbeinu mechuvarim shelo zachar misa b'hilchos Yom HaKippurim." And that's why he says that the Rambam was correct in not mentioning anything at all about the gravy on Yom Kippur. He says, the only thing that I would suggest is using the toothpick. He says that I could find defensible even on Yom Kippur, because using a toothpick to stick in gravy, there you're acting as a safeguard to minimize the amount that you're allowing to enter into her mouth. So that I could certainly justify, even according to the Rambam on Yom Kippur. But just to give her stam gravy before you give her steak, he says, I don't think that's justifiable. Now, whether he's paskening halacha l'maisa, I don't know. And as I think that, the Or Sameach's role over here in this commentary to the Rambam is not to pasken halacha. But what does become clear from all of this discussion is that it seems like there's no qualitative issues to be discussed when it comes to Yom Kippur. Once you have a heter to break your fast, you eat what you need to eat, and you should, whatever the minimum amount that you need to subsist is what you should eat. Even when you have a heter to break your fast, don't eat more than what you need. Don't eat a Sudas Shlomo HaMelech. Don't eat a 5-course meal. The question then becomes, okay, the doctor says I need to have so many calories or I need to have so many carbohydrates in order to be able to keep my diabetes under control, let's say, just as an example. I happen to like a certain food, it's very expensive, and I would like to eat that. And by the way, you know that when you have a hedger to break your fast, you have to make kiddush. There's a whole protocol that you have to do on Yom Kippur. When you are breaking your fast, you have to make kiddush first, and the Shulchan Aruch discusses it. But as far as an imperative to minimize your pleasure while you're eating, you don't see that there is such a criterion. Could one argue that there may be a lefnim mishuras hadin, that if the Torah says you should afflict yourselves, don't make this into a happy experience? Perhaps you could make that argument, but from a halachic standpoint, you see that there is no restriction. So what we try to tell a person, as we've seen already from the Magen Avraham, and cited by the Mishnah Berurah and the other Achronim, is that when you have a heter to break your fast, first try to eat pachas mikashir. First try to, we tell a person, generally speaking, usually diabetes is the most prevalent reason for not fasting on Yom Kippur, and it's very important if you have diabetes, it's very important that you not fast. You're committing an Isser D'Oraisa by trying to fast with diabetes on Yom Kippur. So it's important that you not fast. But even when you don't fast, it's better to try to still be halachically fasting by taking a shot glass and having less than a shot glass full of orange juice every 10 minutes. And that way, if that will keep your sugar levels at bay, and that will be sufficient to not cause you to have an insulin shock or whatever it is, then that's the preferred method. If that's not going to be sufficient, then you should just go ahead and eat whatever you need to eat, but no more than what you need. And then there is no sort of imperative to eat a food that's less expensive or less tasty, unless you feel that in order to be able to feel part of Amcha, you want to feel a part of the experience of Lo Se'una, you want to eat something that tastes like sawdust, you want to eat oat bran, let's say, instead of your favorite food. That's a person's own personal decision, but you see that the halacha does not require that of you. Okay?
What about during the rest of the year?
During the rest of the year, right? So then you have to minimize the isser. Like, for example, this is a very common thing. Person says, I need to take a medication, right? So first of all, a lot of people, when it comes to medication, don't think twice. Doctor says, I got to take it, I'm going to take it. They don't even realize that sometimes there are substitutes, especially when it comes to food supplements. A lot of times, let's say the woman goes to the doctor and says, you need to take calcium supplements, you need to take hemoglobin supplements because your red blood cell count is low, right? So a lot of times a woman will say, well, the doctor said I have to take shark cartilage, in pill form, right, for calcium, or I need to take bovine blood or something, in capsule form. So first of all, you have to realize, if there are viable substitutes, if there are calcium substitutes, that you don't need to take shark cartilage, you can take other food supplements to get you the same amount of calcium, then you're obligated to do so. If you can take the same medication, one is in a capsule, which is made from non-kosher gelatin, and the other one is in a vegetable capsule, then you have to minimize the isser to whatever your ability is. So, that is pretty...
But quality matters during the year.
Quality, it would seem, would matter during the year. No. When it comes to food, quality never matters. It's a question of how much of the isser must I imbibe. That's, in other words...
it's volume, it's not quality.
It's based on shiur, but if I can take the derivative of the isser instead of the isser itself, if I can take the gravy, just the tam of the isser, instead of the isser itself, I should do that.
Isn't that a quality issue?
No, quality doesn't count with food, because once the Torah forbids the consumption of a food, once the Torah forbids achila is dependent upon a kazayis, it's not dependent upon the quality of the food, like we talked about with the case of the Gemara in Shavuos, by the case of the Nida. Only by Isurim, where there's no quantitative measurement placed upon the Isser, can you say that quality is a criterion. Rabbi Chanani ben Akash, yes, please.
I'm just trying to understand, when do you ever go beyond pachas? In other words, maybe with the exception of the case that you described in diabetic, and then I would not be sure. At the end of the day, you can feed somebody pachas. So when does this entire discussion ever materialize? In other words, what situation would you as a Rav have that something where you would say to that person, you can eat? In other words, when do you ever need to go beyond pachas?
There are two situations when I would say that. One is where pachas is not sufficient. Maybe there are situations where medically less than an ounce every 10 minutes simply will not suffice. I think that there could be certain diabetic conditions where that isn't sufficient. And second of all, I'll tell you another case, practically speaking, practical rabbinics, right? When a person hears that he's restricted in that way, he's going to be more machmir than I tell him. So I tell him just eat regularly. Because for that person, if I tell him all of these restrictions, he's not going to want to do it. So you have to also analyze the psychology of the shoel. And if the shoel is the kind of person who's going to hears that he's restricted, he's just going to say it's not worth the bother. So then you just tell him go ahead and eat, because his pikuach nefesh is the more important.